Welcome back to the Gestalt Get-Together. I am thrilled if you are here for the live recording or listening back on a streaming platform. The Gestalt Get-Together is your podcast for discussing GLP, the autistic neurotype, the importance of musical language, psychoacoustics, and really how our field is responding to this growing world of GLP discourse. My name is Corinne Zmoos, CCC-SLP. I love GLPs, I work with them every day, and I've had massive success using the ideas from proposed frameworks like NLA. And I also identify myself as lovingly skeptical because I need more information, I need more data, and I gotta get more evidence. Now, this evening, I am thrilled to be welcoming our guest. I'm going to be interviewing Monica Reaves, LCSW-C, M.Ed, about the importance of doing the detective work and dissecting what a GLP says, especially if they surprise us with vocabulary or language that might sound violent or scary, or maybe feel like it's not truthful. Speaking from her rich experience as a clinical social worker, special education teacher, and mom to a GLP, I hope Monica's going to give listeners a window into her skilled interpretation skills in moments when GLPs are trying their best to share a hard idea with the language that they have. Monica, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's really thrilling to be able to share my experiences and clinical insights with everybody here.
Yeah, you are at an intersection that I think a lot of people want to hear about, where you work with GLPs in your career, and then you've also got one at home. Tell us what that is like for you.
So I get to really experience the GLP world 24/7 because of my own kiddo who is amazing and thrives in a way that is not a neurotypical way and has taught me and has really built my own expertise. And then when I work um, with my clients, which can be children, teens, adults, and I see the similarities. I see the almost, I want to say, the culture that it is definitely different. And in talking to my husband, we've kind of come up with a way of understanding this community a little bit better. It's sort of like they are living in a foreign country, and they are expressing their ideas in their customs in a different way. And so the people at large are not always going to understand what that is like. So they need interpretation services, translation services, and that's where parents and clinicians come in to help bridge that communication challenge.
Can you tell me about how you came to learn about Gestalt language processing, and then also maybe how your understanding of it has changed over the years?
Yeah, so when my child was diagnosed as autistic at the age of 2, I was a social worker. I was a clinical social worker, and of course, I knew everything from school, but I didn't know that. And as my child continued to develop, I began to understand that even in the speech modalities that are the most the ones that are typically available in school or even in clinics, those, yes, were helpful. However, there was a missing link, and I just couldn't figure out what that was. And then one day I was searching. It was like during the pandemic, and I'm like searching other avenues for my kiddo, and lo and behold, I typed in what was recommended for from one of his from one of their speech therapists at school, and they said, oh, look up this individual because I believe that would be a close match for my kid. And I did. And what came up was actually you, but you were not the person that had been recommended. It was just something completely different. But then I remember meeting you, and then I remember Nathaniel just like, huh.
I remember that moment where I echoed back what I thought was a gestalt. Nathaniel produced, and I was like, that's a Gestalt. I felt it because it had the rich intonation. It was like, that sounds like it's from something. So I echoed it back with the same thing, and that smile, it was that ding moment.
And
Yeah.
it was funny because you were seeing it like, two-dimensional, if you will, because it was pandemic times. And I was, of course, next to them. And I was like, wow, I've never seen this reaction to this. And so from there on, that's when they started services with you. But then in addition to that, I began to really learn what it meant to be the type of communicator that my child was. So yes, that's how it all started.
Tell me about what Gestalts look like at home, and what are a couple ways that you really show up for your child's processing style?
Yeah. So a lot of the times I remember early on when when professionals would tell me about the scripting and how scripting, unfortunately, would have like a bad rap. Because scripting would be like you want them to have a more natural and spontaneous language. And so you're trying to achieve what the professionals are telling you, but you're like, this is not jiving with how my child naturally responds to language. And on top of that, my kiddo is very rhythmically inclined and has this rich musical ear. And so I began to kind of ignore some of the suggestions from the professionals and kind of like, okay, we really are going to look at this script. And this is bringing my child joy. And it's also bringing connection, because a lot of the times, behaviors that were there, it's not really behaviors, but it was a way to connect with a parent. And but it looks different. So as we shared in the scripting, I began to notice, okay, this script looks very much like a relationship. So it began to make sense. Oh, my kiddo is trying to connect with me and showing me this script and repeating it over and over again because they're trying to connect with me and kind of delving into our relationship, kind of like, have that intimate moment. So I was like, okay, let's go with this. And I felt that the language piece became more and more prevalent as I followed their suit, as I followed their interest and joined in that rhythm with them as well. So I think it connected us to a very deep level.
Now, I want to hear more about, so we've heard a little bit about home and what GLP looks like at home. So your work clinically might look different than a speech pathologist. And most of our listeners are speech therapists here on our recording. We do have a lot of parents listening as well. But a lot of listeners might not know what it looks like to do your job, and the specific things that you might be targeting. Can you tell us more about that in a general sense?
Sure. So I'm a mental health therapist, and for years and years, I worked for Child Protective Services. And unfortunately, I did see a lot of hurt and pain in children that were broken. But unfortunately, what I would also see a lot were children that were either not neurodiverse or had additional disabilities. And when they experience trauma, there is a lack of mental health professionals to help work through that trauma because of language differences or because of neurotypes. And even though there are a few here and there, therapy for a neurotypical individual or will look very different than therapy for a client that is neurodiverse, that has language differences, or that approaches treatment in a very different style. So just like special education teachers are tasked with modifying and adapting curriculum for our students in order for them to access the curriculum, that's where I was like, I need to bridge these two things together because my clients deserve to have their trauma treated and deserve to have healing. It's going to look different, but they still deserve it. So that's what my clinical practice works on.
That's so cool. I feel like there's so many interesting overlaps because you're inherently, well, maybe most of the time using language as a vehicle for that. And, but I'm wondering, do you feel like emotion is one of the main, like, core tenets of your work? Or what do you feel like are like the core things that you're supporting?
So that's what's really interesting because with neurodiverse individuals, we have, proprioception, we have vestibular, we have all these other senses that really make up the nervous system regulation. So what I have really kind of like hone in is that I need the information from these other disciplines, occupational therapy, speech language pathology, in order to then build a holistic approach for my clients. So if I have a child that is experiencing trauma that is neurodiverse, they are not going to sit across from me and tell me everything about their trauma. No, that's not how we're gonna do it. So what are we gonna do? We are going to use our swing. And as we're using our swing, and if they have the language, they may begin to do a trauma narrative of what happened. And I can then provide the tools. But let's say I'm working with kiddos that have apraxia of speech. How do we do it then? Well, then we need lots of visuals. We need lots of things that are going to support them as the client that is looking to heal. But it's the tools are going to look different through more manipulatives, through games, through visuals, and just one specific client being able to write to me, I told about a very traumatic event. And when that client wrote that, you could see like, all of this just was able to lift all this like heaviness, just to say that this individual was able to write out just 2 words, I told.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, using different modalities, writing it out, maybe using manipulatives. Do you ever use things like stuffed animals, action figures to create scenes or tableaus?
Yes, so a lot of that will come into play as so I have one particular client that has had a history of um, uh, intimate partner violence. And in order to express what's on their mind, they have created scenes um, using dinosaurs because we love dinosaurs. Nothing beats dinosaurs, and we are going to learn about all the dinosaurs. So after several sessions, there was this elaborate scene of dinosaurs, of what the mom dinosaur and dad dinosaur were going through, what the baby dinosaurs were feeling, and none of this was said to me in a way that like any I statements. There were no I statements because that's a huge thing that I have seen with GLPs is that does not occur. But it's really important to still get the message across. So the dinosaurs had a very tumultuous time, and there was a moment in time when the parent dinosaurs needed to be put in different spaces for the safety of the dinosaur family. And in that play, there was a lot of, we had dinosaur jail, which kind of like we could see where this client wanted, what they wanted the aggressor to kind of experience. They wanted that aggressor to experience dinosaur jail, and they wanted the victim to be able to go to dinosaur hospital. So, getting the build to build a hospital, it was just really like, I've told my story through this dinosaur elaborate plan. And there was not a whole lot of talking, it was just a lot of small 2-3 word statements.
Wow.
Yeah.
That captures a lot.
Mhm.
You're reminding me of a client I'm currently working with who's a Gestalt processor, highly articulate, just beautiful grammar, and has really moved through, when you think about like the language stages, beautifully. And you're reminding me of, he experienced a pretty acute trauma with his biological father. Parents are now separated. Mom's got full custody. Big relief for her and for this kid, but this kid didn't have the language for that relief. And that he's still quite young to be able to talk about this moment that happened. But it's very interesting because this moment happened right next to the family car. And after that, it was all about where people sit in the car. Grandma sits in the front right seat, and dad, and then I sit in the back right seat. And I sit here, I say over and over and over again, where do people sit in the car? And a lot of our play ended up being about seating arrangements. And it was all about this language. Then it moved to dining room tables, and then it shifted around. And we were just, at first we didn't understand. We're like, why, what is this? And then mom had this aha moment. She goes, oh my gosh, when this was happening, I wonder if he was like staring at the car. And like that was where his focus was. But it really came out through seating arrangements and play, not allowing any male characters in play. Like, oh, there's no daddy cow. There's no daddy turtle. And it's really amazing how through these almost proxies, I think we talked a lot about this idea of proxy, and I use that a lot with older kids as well, like speaking through perhaps a stuffed animal. That's something we've both experienced. But
Mhm.
these animals, creatures can be a proxy, especially if they're special interest based,
Mhm.
to tap into those hard moments. So yeah, I've seen it on this side as well.
Absolutely. It sounds like to me from the experience that you're sharing that that was the way this GLP was processing their trauma. That's what they do. And usually with the modalities of trauma focused work, that would be considered the narrative part of the processing of grief and loss.
I just feel like there's so much that we could learn from your field just to even catch these representations and catch these narratives. It's so fascinating to me. And there's certainly lots of moments where I'm like, how far am I going outside my scope right now? And so it's like it's hard to know because nobody owns language, nobody owns emotion. But I think I know I can only speak for myself, but I find it extremely important to keep learning about what your field does, to know like where are those limits and where can I help with the letters that come after my name.
I think I feel the same way when I'm,
Yeah,
bringing in the work of an SLP or the work of an OT because I'm like, okay, I want to be mindful of where those limits are, and yet my client is impacted by all of these things that in order for me to give the best service possible, I need to bring in.
totally. Yeah, I think that's an ever-changing like conversation about where those lines are, which is why I'm so grateful to have conversations like this. Um, there's something that has been on my mind since January. We had a conversation where you mentioned this really interesting pattern of a Gestalt language processor who it seemed like they're telling a lie, but you realize something much more interesting was happening through their language. Can you share the story that we talked about?
Yes, it really I can't remember all the particulars, but I do remember kind of like the wording. Whenever my kiddo, well, back then was very upset, and usually will get either really upset at something that someone did, and you know, um, they have this a cousin that's 2 years younger than they are, and they spend every day together because that's the way our life is. So something had happened, and my kiddo started saying, my cousin gave me the middle finger. My cousin gave me the middle finger. And I'm like, no, that's just not something she would do. She is not that, that type of kiddo that would do that for various reasons. Um, And then there was another moment when they had gotten really upset at me and was telling the world that I was doing drugs at home. And so I was like, okay. So in dissecting these moments, I began to learn that my kiddo, of course, is going through a lot of these videos that I keep a close eye on, and I try to give them autonomy because autonomy is very important, but there's certain limits that, so in order to kind of give them those limits, they will use my phone to access some of these videos. And these videos, they're trying to understand the meaning behind certain symbols, such as the middle finger or such as people doing drugs. And they're not explicit, they're just kind of like videos that give this information out. And so in learning what they're doing, even so the premise of what they're saying is obviously nobody's doing drugs in my home and nobody is given the middle finger. But what's happening is that the event, the true event, is so difficult for my child to process, and the closest they can come to how they're feeling is this video, and so this is how I am going to express what's happened. And then as I am now, from January to now, it's sort of like these things now have, or these symbols have taken a whole new look, because now instead of the cousin given the middle finger, now she has become the middle finger. Now she is, and that was a conversation we had though. She is the middle finger. And I was like, wow, okay. And so I heard that she was the middle finger because she did not allow my kid to go into the car first. And that is not what we do. The first person that goes inside the car has to be my kid, followed by the cousin because he's the oldest. And I'm like, okay, so we have lots to work on here. But this is how their mind works. And then with other things that I have done that have caused my kiddo distress is when I've said things that it's a figure of speech. And sometimes I forget, if I use figure of speech, they're going to think this is real. And so I was sharing earlier that, we went to the beach, we had come home, I was exhausted, I was frustrated, and so I was like, man, I can't believe this is not set up. And so my child caught on my frustration, and because we're connected, they were like, so you want to leave our family? And of course, I'm here trying to connect everything together, get everybody set up for nighttime. And I'm like, yes, I would like to leave the family. But again, to me, it was more of a figure of speech. And oh my goodness, it's like, well, if you do that, I will kill you. And of course, that's not what my child means. But if somebody out there is hearing it, they could really misinterpret the situation. And now, since my kiddo is actually taller than I am, they could think that I am in some sort of dire situation. So, but what it means to my child is that if I were to leave the home, it equals death. So equals, I'm not sure for who, but it would equal that feeling of loss and grief. And so I had to dial it down and be like, you know what? My body is feeling tired and I'm saying things that are not true. And I'm sorry that that caused your body to feel not in a good way. So for me, I need some sleep tonight. And so that was good. And what then they said to me, oh, okay, well then let's go to sleep. I was like, all right, problem solved. But I needed to recognize that what I had said really caused anxiety in my child. And so in order to meet where their need was, we needed to kind of flush out this conversation in a way that made sense to them. And again, we can't really talk about emotions because that's very abstract. So we talk about how our body feels. And that makes much more sense to my kiddo than talking about abstract emotion discussions.
Yeah, and it relates so much to what we as SLPs are trying to bring to the table with our clients is make the language about the feeling, especially for kids who are just starting to acquire language. attach the language to the current moment feeling. But then we see this interesting thing happen with GLPs who are speakers, who are a little bit older. They've got the language mechanism, it's happening. But what can emerge is kind of this the usage of this violent language or language that relates to violence. It can be their best attempt to capture that feeling when they don't yet have more flexible language or ideas about it. It's their best attempt at it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that's where you hear the words of like, I'm going to kill you,
Yeah.
I'm going to hurt you, you're going to die. And I hear that a lot in my home when my child is at a level where they're like so angry at something that has happened. But what's interesting is that I, for whatever reason, find it very relaxing to watch medical dramas. And all of these medical dramas, there's, of course, a little bit of gore here and there. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, it relaxes me. So one time my kiddo, what came down, like we're coming downstairs, give me 1 second. And this is what we're doing. Yes.
Grand entrance.
Yes. So one day they were just coming through, just in passing, and as soon as they started, like, oh no, no. So that's when it's like I could understand, like, there's no way that this kiddo means what they're saying when they're seeing it was a glimpse, and that to them was just horrifying.
Well, I think about when I read about or hear from professionals about play therapy and bringing in violent play themes, I think there is a level of normalcy in experimenting with like violence and play, and there's like a healthy exploration that can happen there. But talking about death and violence is way to express ideas, but children don't necessarily understand the severity or the permanence of the topics themselves, but it could help them move through confusion. Is that something that you see in your work when it like maybe even like play or using like toys?
There's a lot of exploration, and there's also like, if I use this terminology, what kind of response will I get from the person listening? And is it the response that I'm seeking, or do I need to keep trying to then get the response that I'm seeking? Now, I've heard from some professionals that it's called attention seeking. It's not attention seeking, in my view. What it is an attempt to connect, and because we don't have a typical way of connecting, we're going to try our way, because our way is what we know. And that's where I see the GLP trying. They're trying a different method that is not necessarily what the world is used to. And what it is, it's again, when we go back to like, it's sort of like, then we are their interpreters, we are their translators to help the world understand. So oftentimes when I'm hearing this from teachers or counselors, I have to kind of also let them know this is the context of what they're saying. It isn't what you think it is, because this is when then we have kids that get wrongfully put in suspension, or wrongfully put in the wrong academic track, or they are seen as those that need more emotional support through these emotional support programs that really sometimes is much more restrictive, rather than providing them inclusion into programs. So having this education or educating of those working with our kids 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, can really go a long way, because like you say, the outside world will not necessarily understand what the GLP is saying.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of, and this is a phrase that Marge Blanc uses a lot when she speaks about natural language acquisition, is the detective work. I think we have the experience, the knowledge, and also like the luxury in our job to be able to do the detective work. But first, a lot of people aren't going to know to do that. But also, just having the time or the energy to do that is a whole different discussion. I think that you're talking about going in and providing that education, that service in different settings. Can you tell me more about some experiences you've had with teachers or other related professionals? Some maybe one that went really well, or one where you just didn't see eye to eye.
Yeah, so one recently was really positive. There's this teacher that it just was like, look, I know that I'm not hearing this correctly because I know this child, but I just don't know how to differentiate. It's like that's okay. So we were able to kind of come up with a strategy of the child was able to determine when they were kidding or when it was exploration versus when it was real. So then whenever there was confusion on the teacher side or the paraeducator side, they would be like, so and so. So are you exploring or are you for real? And then the child was like, oh, exploring. And so, or when, it was for real, like there was like, because again, there's also, just as an aside, a lot of and I don't know if this is everybody's experience, but a lot of my kiddos tend to really take on the personas of certain characters. So,
Oh, big time. Yes.
so this kiddo, whenever they had like their serious face on, oh, for real. And then we knew that it was for real. So kind of like those little strategies really helped build a better relationship where the kid is not feeling like I'm not safe in this classroom because no one understands me. And the teacher doesn't feel like I don't know what to do with this. So that was like a good, just like it was a really simple thing that really they were able to really build on. With this other another kiddo that I had on my caseload from my other work. Unfortunately, talking to another fellow social worker in the program that the kiddo was in was not. It was basically at this point, it's my way or the highway, because this is the way the world works, and the world isn't going to accommodate this child, so this child has to understand. And I'm like, okay, but your expectations are from a very different student profile. This profile is not the ones that are the norm or that you are taught that you will see in every classroom. So if we don't meet this child where this child is, you are making decisions for this child that can impact that child for the rest of their life. So, these are harder conversations when we have either clinicians, professionals that are stuck in this old world view of conditioning. So, and that can be really impactful.
Yeah, I'm curious about you're sparking so many memories of when I've worked with kids throughout the years. And I'm remembering that when I would encounter this kind of language, especially before I knew about GLP, I thought that the best thing I could do was ignore it, ignore any language that was like violent or speaking towards violence. And I'm wondering if you can speak to um, that idea of like, oh, ignore it as a strategy.
No, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't work because again, the child, the neurodiverse child, the child that, may have a what is also known as pathological demand avoidance. I like persistent demand for autonomy. But at GLPs, they will continue this repetitive way of communicating until their needs are met. And it may not change. It's not going to become novel all of a sudden. It's just going to be the same repetition, hoping that the response will be different. And then what happens when the response isn't different or isn't meeting the person's needs, That's where all the misunderstandings happen. That's where, okay, now we need to restrain. Okay, now this is what we need to do. So there's clash. However, when we look at what is being communicated as an attempt to connect, and rather than ignore, but to like, kind of like regulate ourselves, do some co-regulation with that child by just being present in the moment, then we build that trust and rapport to then move to the next stage of, okay, what is this really about? What are you seeking? And then um, I think, defenses come down and then connection begin.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how much you mentioned figurative language or figure of speech, how much these communication moments from Gestalt processors, they feel like imagery. It's like she is the middle finger. I mean, that's a metaphor. Or um one time your GLP told me that I need to get to the oubliette. I learned what an oubliette was that day. It was a place where you put prisoners.
Ah,
But like get to the oubliette, like that was really powerful imagery because whatever I did, I deserved to be put away out of sight, like a prisoner. But it's powerful imagery and it's so, I don't know, it's like one of those funny things that like my field does in particular, where we like rail on these clients for not, like, oh, well, they can't understand figurative language. And I'm like, well, but and then we don't understand theirs, like it's all of this. We need to teach them about figure of speech. We need to like drill all these things in, but then have we actually taken the time to interpret the like really powerful imagery that a Gestalt processor is bringing to us? So it's just one of those funny little twists where I'm like, wait a minute, double standard going on here.
that is so true. I think that's such a good point. Because oftentimes when we do the detective work and build that rapport, build that connection, we will get to deeper understanding of that individual to then continue skills building. But you really can't build skills if you don't partner with that child or that individual. You really, I think in anything, if a doctor is condescending towards me, there is very it is unlikely that I will follow that doctor's recommendations. So why do we expect anything less from these kids or teens, adults that communicate in this way?
Yeah, there's a quote that this is reminding me of. Can I share it?
Yeah.
A little long, but as I was researching for this episode, I came across it, and I am a sucker. Listen, I love research, but I'm a sucker for really beautifully written research. So, this is from a 2021 paper. It's called "Embodied Imagination and Metaphor Use in Autism Spectrum Disorder." So, quote, "Metaphoric engagement can be seen as a context, a linguistic world within which the therapist and client stay in order to explore their experiences and create new ways of positioning. This context is a jointly created space where the exploration of the meanings and the change in perspectives can occur. From this point of view, the therapist pays attention to the metaphors that the clients spontaneously use when talking about their experiences. The therapist also asks clients for metaphors that suit their lived experiences. The therapist gains an alternative way of listening to what clients have to say and how to respond. To facilitate the process of engagement, the client and the therapist often try to find ways of externalizing the metaphor by drawing it or using figurines and objects to stand in for the metaphor. Making an analogy through the metaphor is in itself not sufficient for therapeutic gain because it is not the metaphor itself that does the work. It is how the metaphor is used and responded to in an interaction that does the work. What matters is how the metaphor is received and what is being done with it. The aim of the therapist is to stay within the context of the metaphor, as the context opens up a linguistic world of possibilities for discussion and allows both of them to explore in novel ways. End quote, and that is by Ruchinska, Fondelli, and Gallagher, 2021.
I love that. I love that because it can be applied into so many
Mm,
things and
yeah.
just different contexts.
Yeah. I think I love anytime someone writes about that therapeutic like moment when you're really in it. And God, that's that one part that was about like the therapist has this alternative way of listening. I
Mhm.
think a lot of speech therapists were listening for grammar, we're listening for the mechanics of language, or oh, is this functional? But when you're kind of, and the phrase I use is like, meet them in the metaphor. Can you really meet that kid in that image or in that gestalt? And it is this very different way of listening where you got to go a couple levels deeper. And you've referred to it as detective work. There's another word I've heard you use, which is dissect, which I really like. So, thinking about the way that you work, whether directly with a client or by coaching or teaching other professionals, if you were going to name a couple techniques or strategies that you use, what would they be?
So again, it has to be very much child specific, individualized. One's one thing that I always strive to do is rapport building. This isn't any, and I feel like sometimes it can be overlooked because as professionals, we kind of want to sometimes, and I've felt for this, we want to get to the nitty gritty of what are we here for? What are we doing? How do we, how do we um, look at progress? And we're always measuring and we're always, objectives and goals. And that's important, but we can't get there until we do that rapport building. So if I am in a situation where there's escalation, we have a client that's escalating, how am I going to be able to de-escalate that situation, whether, I'm coaching a parent or whether I'm doing the de-escalation? So let's see. First of all, I'm the one that's going to have to not react. I'm going to be tasked with, all right, I'm just going to stay silent for a little bit here. Let's see what happens. And then once I see the communication style and it could be through a behavior, it could be through whatever is happening in the moment, after taking a few breaths, just calmly, I see that your body is doing this. Your body does not look comfortable to me. I'm sorry about that. Saying words like that can really help anyone be like, huh, someone is just kind of like listening to me and not just talking at me or telling me to calm down. Because as we all know, it's never worked to say to someone, calm down. So to be able to kind of like partner with that person, just like meet them where they are, if they need to throw a chair in that moment, give them the space to throw that chair. Once that energy is out, all right, do we need another chair or can we kind of look at something that really is going to help you in this moment? So I have one particular kiddo that is a bit of a thrower. And I was like, all right, Monica, what helps this kiddo calm? It's not gonna be the fidgets, it's not gonna be the trampoline, it's not gonna be any of this. We really like trash compactor videos. Ah,
We're back.
okay. Yeah, we're back. Okay, cool. I
All right.
wasn't sure. Okay.
Listen, we are so back. And the last thing I heard you saying was trash compactor videos. I was cackling with laughter. So let's
Yeah.
pick it back up.
Yes, yes. So we went through several YouTube videos and we went from up here being like super dysregulated because the world was not a happy place for my kiddo that day to like, and he was just like, we had a few rules. The rule was that I would hold the iPad, but we would look up those trash compactor videos and he would tell me what he wanted and he could slide. he could slide through it until he found the one that really kind of helped him. And there I learned a lot about, garbage disposal and transfer stations, recycling, and through all that, we wanted to learn 4 different words, which were boundaries, safety, trust, and privacy. So in that moment, I noticed that if I wanted my client to learn these really important words and what they meant, we were going to do them through trash compactor videos. And so, we wrote out our rules of what, we could do and couldn't do while we were in the session. But what was really the most important rule was to have fun. But we also needed to learn about safety and privacy and trust to both of us have fun. And so this really helped de-escalate the situation. So what we were noticing in school is that we were having some of these similar reactions. So I was like, bring up a trash compactor video of his choosing. And that has really been the way to help him calm down when he's just feeling like, okay, right now the world does not make sense. But you know what? Trash compactors videos do. And if you give me that for a few minutes, I will learn whatever you want me to learn. But I just need that. So I was like, this is his way of regulating. So sometimes that's what we need to do in order, that's a strategy. And I know that there's like screens and all of this things that screens for whatever reason can be a bad thing for kids, but we got to understand that our kids are very different than the neurotypical norm. And there are things within that content that is going to help them learn, regulate, and be able to move forward. Because at the end of the day, what we need is to move forward and not get stuck in that emotional roller coaster. So that's one thing that we do.
Yeah, so that really stands out to me. I want to go back and just say again something from the beginning that you mentioned was when you're talking about interpreting what the client's body might be feeling. It seems you're bringing it back to somatics. And that definitely stands out as a technique that someone could take away from this of like, I'm noticing, or like, I wonder if. I also notice you use a lot of the use of third person we. Is that intentional?
Oh, yeah, because a lot of the times if I say you to anyone, any of my clients, that seems to be accusatory, no matter what it is that we're talking about. If I also use phrases like, can you? It's like, no, I cannot.
I
But
always say anything that tees up a no, we got to move away from that.
yeah. So, and this can be for anything because, and today actually, I wanted to play a little bit with that with my own kiddo. And I was like, can you go brush your teeth? And there was no movement at all. A few minutes passed and I was like, go brush your teeth. Oh yeah, okay. We went and it was like, this is interesting. So we've moved away from the can you and more to the this is what I need. Because that for whatever reason seems to hold, not that you're giving more of a command, but it's like that's important. But if you say can you, it's almost like it's not that important. Yeah, for whatever reason, in my experience, this is what's happened. So if I tell a kid, can you get off the chair? They're probably not going to get off the chair, but I'm like, let's stay on the ground. Okay. So for whatever reason, that is more important. Um, so the way that again, if I use we, it's because you and I are in this together versus like again, we can't do I statements because it just doesn't work. But if we say we, it's sort of like, we're doing it together. You know, we're doing this as a team. I am not commanding you to do something. I am giving you autonomy. So there's all of this that they will interpret differently than typically would be interpreted.
Yeah, it's incredible how a single word a single word choice can make such a shift. You're speaking to, when you think about the word can, you're speaking to what's called a modal verb. So
Mm.
things like can, should, will, may, and these speak to a condition of possibility. It could be. And for a literal thinker or someone who doesn't have much flexibility, it's like, yeah, I can, but I don't want to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, flipping that to go brush your teeth. Now, as soon as you said that, it made me think about declarative language, which a lot of people who are learning about Gestalt processing or have been in it for a while, declarative language comes up a lot, especially if we've got a PDA profile.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your relationship with declarative language.
Yeah, I mean, declarative language is just really important because, again, if I phrase things in a way that doesn't hold weight or is meaningful to my PDA um, child, it's not going to go anywhere. And this can be anything from health, education, social emotional situations, friendships. It's just, it really doesn't hold a lot of weight. So there has to be meaning behind the ask. And if they don't find meaning behind that, we're not going to get anywhere. And I also have to honor the fact that I have to honor what is meaningful to that child or that individual. Because again, um, if there is no meaningfulness behind what they're doing or the action, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I think, and I just realized that some listeners might not know about declarative language, but it's this way of reframing a prompt that it's making a declaration, something like I notice or I see or I wonder. And it's this way that invites a child or an individual to hear the mental cue that's driving you towards the solution. So it can really tap into the brain in a different way. So just want to clarify that.
And I feel like it also, what declarative language does is that, again, it partners you with that individual versus you telling them how they're feeling versus you telling them what to do. But you're actually creating this teamwork approach, which
Mhm.
actually is another method in various clinical modalities when dealing with clients in different contexts. You know, in CPS, one of the things that we were taught is that you need to partner with that family. It's a family team decision-making meeting. It's not a CPS telling you what to do meeting, because that's not what we do. At least in the agency that I was working at. I know that it can be, there's different places. Um, but essentially this using declarative language, you're partnering with that individual where they are not going to be feeling threatened by what you're asking or what you're pointing out. If you're pointing out to a child, oh, you're sad, my kid is going to be like, no, I'm not. Tears might be coming down their face, and they'll be like, no, I'm not. But if I were to say, buddy, I see these tears coming down your eyes, and I hear you feeling, or I hear that your breath is short as you're talking to me. How can I help? So then, maybe I might provide a choice. Can I help by watching this video that you like? Can I help by turning on this music that you like? And maybe it might not be any of those choices, but it kind of like moves their brain into thinking, okay, yeah, what is going to help me right now? And lo and behold, it could be a Hershey bar. So I'm like, all right, Hershey it is. So yeah, the declarative language, rather than telling the person how they're feeling, pointing out what you're seeing.
Yeah, so there's a resource called PDA North America, pdanorthamerica.org. I really like their resources, but they describe it so beautifully. I'm going to read a direct quote. They say, instead of direct commands like do this thing, it is statements in the form of observations that leave room for the other person to choose how they respond. And that allows that agency to happen. And I just think about like instead of kind of a paternalistic way of doing it, of like, this is what you need to feel better, this is what you need to do to heal. And this speaks to the wider therapeutic world in general. It's I'm helping you make decisions for yourself, helping you build that agency for how to make your life, or to make choices more in alignment with how you want your life to be. And if that might be as small as a chocolate bar or as big as, some of the big life transitions that older GLPs are moving into. I really love to kind of jump off from that idea. And, you've been raising a GLP for quite a while. What are some of the interesting things that come up as we move into preteen GLP life?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's fun because I'm discovering now that my child has always had a sense of autonomy from very early on. And now it's maturing, if you will. And the way that it's maturing is how we're dressing, what we're calling ourselves, how we are identifying. And really, one of the biggest work that I've done with not just my child, but with all the kids that I work with is advocacy. They need to have the self-advocacy tools. Because again, unfortunately, statistics are there where they are ripe for all sorts of unhealthy and unsafe things that can happen to them. So one of the things that I'm noticing as they are growing into more and more of their own person is that they are using that self-advocacy and they really don't care. Or actually they do. They care, but they don't allow it to deter them from who they are going to be. So if, for example, they've decided that we're going to wear a skirt today, and there might be a family member visiting, and that family member may not necessarily be that open-minded about who my child is, they're still going to wear that skirt. They will ask questions, and we will talk about, who is going to be a supportive person in their life and who will not, but who you need to go to for that safety zone. But they will wear that skirt regardless of what comment a person may have made. So to see that is awesome. And at the same time, you're like, I just really hope that the world out there will, that you'll be able to have all the tools and the shields that you will need from this world that is not as great as we would like it to be.
Yeah, I think that self-advocacy more and more, I think like, gosh, the last 3, 4 years, that has become a really big push in the speech pathologist community, at least those who are really aligned with neurodiversity affirming practice, GLPs, is, oh, we gotta teach these kids to self-advocate, modeling potential gestalts that tap into, I think, those ideas of like boundaries, trust, privacy. What was the fourth one?
Boundaries, privacy, trust, safety.
Safety. Yeah, exactly. Is I think there's at least when I was in grad school in my early days of working with autistic kids, especially with AAC devices, is functional, 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 request, name, and that was it. And it's like, what about this advocacy of being able to use language to relate to other people, not just in a way of doing what other people say? Because that's important in a lot of situations as a child who doesn't really know about like how to stay safe. But if it stops there, then you've got this whole population whose entire childhood was based on doing exactly what adults told them, no matter what, and not having a choice. And that can set us up for really, really scary stuff. Really
Mhm.
scary stuff. And these self-advocacy phrases, or these ability to, once we move out of the phrases, start to mitigate them, recombine them into more generative grammar, I've been noticing more and more that using special interests, imagery, metaphor can be a really powerful way of building that, especially through character relationships that GLPs know very well. And so instead of just using kind of the general, like, if you encounter someone who does this, then do this, that's so abstract. But if you're like, in this scene with Lightning McQueen, with Mater, they're building trust. Like, it's going through this door or this channel that makes sense to a Gestalt processor. And you can really talk about relationships and safety through the characters. And I'm wondering if that's something that you've seen or that you've tried going through characters.
Yeah. So with that, my own kiddo, oh, what is the name of this ladybug? I forget the Marinette, miraculous somebody, miraculous ladybug. Um, it's a cartoon, and we have Marinette and Chloe, and we have Cat Noir and all these other great characters. And of course, my kiddo is a fan of Marinette, and they're as you might know, they love to create animation in what's called this Beyond, it's called Beyond software that we got suckered into purchasing for.
Oh, me too. I got suckered into it too.
Oh, there you go. Well, we've created a vast collection of like all these different characters and what they have gone through. And because they use, again, they use my YouTube account, and so they upload them. And so I get to see what they're uploading and who's commenting. And so there was this other young person who also did not like Marinette, does not like Ladybug, and thinks that Marinette should go to quote unquote jail. And so they had this feud going on where this person is not my friend anymore because they have wronged Marinette. And so they had this mini feud on YouTube, and it was, and both of them around the same age. But you know, we have the proponents of Ladybug and the people that or the individual that really thinks she should not be in this world. So it was quite the feud. And so they my kiddo was really attempting to show the reasons why Marinette is this magnificent character and why this person wanted to put her in jail and she shouldn't be in jail. So it became kind of like a social justice movement between these two. And it was just fascinating to see how they were so involved in advocating for this character and how this person was completely they called it abusing, child abusing Marinette. Now the reason they know about child abuse is because of the work that I did. However, they don't really know the specifics. So for them, a child abuse, it can be any child that's being harmed by anybody. It doesn't matter how, because they don't know really the specifics. As they're getting older and we're having more conversations as to how others can hurt children, then they're like, oh, okay, so that's not what this person was doing to Marinette, but you know, they needed to find a word. And they're kind of still in that exploration as to what it is, the word that this individual was doing to Marinette, because it's not no longer child abusing, but it's not good either. So
All of this speaks to this term that I only recently learned about that I think some listeners might find compelling. It's called analogical reasoning. So we think about analog analogy. And this is analogical reasoning is the ability for someone to establish a link between something that is known and understood and then a new situation. The known situation is called the source, so maybe like the Gestalt, and then the new situation is called the target. And what they do is they interpret this relationship based on structural similarities between the two things. Now, a neurotypical brain might intuit structural similarities at a conceptual level. But when I read structural similarities, I thought, well, that makes sense that interpreting two characters interacting is very structurally similar to that child and maybe an analogous human in their life. And so it might be easier to interpret the new situation in their, real life if there's an analogous situation that they're already familiar with in a piece of media. And I do this all the time while preparing a child for a doctor's appointment, a dentist appointment. I just was talking to a family today. They're preparing their GLP to stay in a hotel for the first time. So immediately I said, okay, let's think about all the shows they watch, any hotel episodes. Let's comb through. Because if we can create something analogous to it, it'll be easier to connect source and target together so that they can process it more easily. They have more cognitive resources that aren't just devoted to processing or maybe being afraid. And it's finding a common relationship between what is truly understood and integrated and something that might not be understood. So it reminds me so much of what you're saying. And I think that analogical reasoning, we can use this well with GLPs, especially visually or tactile, because analogical reasoning, it appears to, when we look at the neuroscience of it, and there's a really interesting paper. It's by Belisle, Palalunis, and Dixon from 2021. It's called Emergent Entailed Analogical Reasoning of Same, Different, and Opposite in Children with Disabilities. But they say that, quote, analogical reasoning appears to rely on domain general mechanisms that operate not only on verbal analogies, but also on problems posed in nonverbal formats, pictures, geometrical patterns, or mathematical expressions. So I was jazzed about this area of research of analogical reasoning because it kind of speaks to Gestalt processors, and it makes me think about, like, if we use videos, if we use these characters, we're tapping into the known to help build the unknown.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. And I feel like some of these GLPs, speaking for my own, um, they will kind of build on that.
Mm.
So it's like, okay, so I can't find a specific program or a specific video clip where this was happening. And I think this is where Nathaniel got the idea of, oh, I'm going to use Beyond.
Yeah.
I am going to use Beyond. I am going to use my favorite characters, and I am going to put them in situations that I wonder about or situations that scare me. There, there's a video that they created with, I can't remember which characters they were, but one of the things that in the past we were kind of like working on was, having to go and get a shot. And so we created this video where somebody is getting a shot and there's going to be this specific cry that they're going to do while they're getting the shot. It's not going to be it's not going to be like a high-pitched cry or low tone cry. It's going to be something very specific. And so once they found the specific cry that they wanted, they inserted it into the video. And then when we went to actually go get the shot, they announced to the doctor, I am going to scream. And the doctor was like, you go, no, I'm sorry, I'm going to yell. And the doctor was like, okay, nope, no problem. We just need to get the shot, but that's okay. And so, yep, the shot was given, the yell, and the yell was just like, it was like maybe like a 2-second yell, but it was just so metered that there was, I don't even know how to explain how perfectly timed it was.
Yeah.
And then they were done. They're like, okay, well, that's what I needed.
It was almost like preparatory echolalia to get through the moment.
Get through that moment. Yeah. And now that's kind of like our go-to whenever we
Wow.
know that, we need to get this blood drawn or whatever it is that we need to get that is not going to be a comfortable feeling for our body. We make the announcement and that's what we're going to do. And then we're done.
Wow. So it sounds like Nathaniel searched for an acoustic signal that matched the emotion that they thought they were going to feel. And this is almost a way of preparing their body for the release valve that they need.
Mhm.
Wow, that is, I mean, that's high level self-care right there. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
It could, because it wasn't going to be a spontaneous cry that you would, typically have from a child or anybody that, goes and gets a
Yeah.
uncomfortable procedure done at the doctor's. It had to be the specific cry. And then, of course, days later, we kept on hearing the cry and we're like, oh my gosh. But they needed to replay that moment. So we were like, can I go here and you go there and you can hear it, but I just need a moment of silence. And they were okay with that. But yeah. So usually we will get that cry at, either if they're reminded of the event
Yeah.
or we're we had left the doctor.
Yeah. Wow. I I'm thinking to like their use of the Beyond software, which I recommend people check it out. It's actually a really great software for working with older GLPs because you can make a whole world on it. But you're speaking to something that when I'm talking to other therapists who aren't quite sure where to go with older GLPs or kids who have like really moved into language, but they're always going to be Gestalt processors, is world building, is creating avenues to explore where you're still tapping into the original Gestalt or characters, but you can create and modify worlds where new things can happen. But it's still safe. It's still this safe domain with there's an analogy I use. I love analogy. People in my life are sick of it. They're like, you don't have to have an analogy for everything. And I'm like, oh, but I do. I think about when I'm working with a Gestalt language processor, having a predictable container with novel contents. If the container is the same, but then we bring a bit of novelty into the contents, it feels very safe. Whereas if it's an unpredictable container for learning or interaction and the contents are also novel, that is, no thanks, very scary.
Mhm.
I think about something like Beyond, or what Nathaniel and I have been using for a very long time is this website that is so funny. I swear a GLP made it. I swear an adult. There's so many websites now where I'm like a Gestalt processor definitely made this. But it's called Lazy Pyro, and it has every AI voice on the internet. And you can create conversations between the AI voices. It's amazing. But this website has become our container, our predictable container where novel things can happen, novel storytelling can happen. And what used to be very fixed, which was AI voices can only say certain phrases, it can only be certain things, has transformed into a place or a container where we can do anything. Our characters can go anywhere. They usually like to be in Mineville High School because Minecraft is life. But we've gone to the moon. We've gone to Mineville Cafe. We usually don't get too far from Mineville High School, but it's this place where we've been able to move out and we've been able to explore bullying. We've been able to explore very mean teachers. I happen to be the principal of this school and I'm very mean. I am a terrible principal. But it's this place where through these characters, who most of them happen to be stuffed animals, who you might know very well, but we're using a lot of imagery, metaphor, and comfortable characters who make sense to explore new things.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because as they go through the stages of life, through early childhood, middle childhood, preteen years, the concept of itself doesn't change.
Hmm.
But, the container that you're describing is going to look different.
Hmm.
At some point, it was just the stuffed animals.
Yes.
It was just the stuffed animals, and we didn't deviate from that. And for, for a certain time period, it was just these certain animals. And then we moved on to it's sort of like character building exercises and, just exploring these other themes um, and through the work that you all have been doing has actually been a little bit of some of, unfortunately, Nathaniel did suffer trauma in school and has been processing this trauma through this play and through this exploration and through these narratives, which is very different. It's a very different way of healing, but it has created feeling, which has, I think I shared with you, culminated in how Nathaniel was able to self advocate for what happened to him in this like high level court proceeding that had to happen. And what came out of that was this like confident young person saying their piece, like,
Yeah.
okay, it is now really over.
Yeah. This is what happened to me. I told.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
that's all they needed.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, I think it's always so interesting what can come out in these conversations through the play. I mean, there's been so much. We have talked about school, God, a year and a half,
Mhm.
even longer than that. And
Mhm.
I think for some clinicians who are working with Gestalt processors, they're doing the same scenes over and over, or the same characters, and they get nervous of like, is this bad? Is this wrong that we're doing the same thing over and over again? I think there's because a lot of people are very new to Gestalt processing. And I have moments like that too. I know that when I was working with Nathaniel early on, we watched the same Roblox YouTube video of the 33 floors, this elevator video,
Oh,
every session for maybe 6 months. But that was the container. That 29-minute video was the container. And within that video, so much growth and exploration and language happened because whatever was happening in that video, I was modeling on the AAC device. I was stretching, maybe can one more stuffed animal get into this boat? Or get into this elevator. There's so much stretching that could happen within it through this container of this elevator. But I know that as a clinician on my side, I was like, oh my gosh, is Monica in the other room being like, they're doing this again? What is this? What's this lady up to? So I think that clinicians, at least the ones I've spoken to and from personal experience, there's that nervousness of like, is it okay that we're still in this scene? And I just want to give permission that like that is the container where change can happen. That is a safe place for them. Meet them in the metaphor. And
mhm.
like I look back on that elevator period. And it's so funny because it's like I look back on different containers of my work with Nathaniel, and it's like that container, the time we spent is the reason why we're here. We were working on storytelling then. It just looked very different. But
Mhm.
I know that that elevator is why now we can go to the moon. We can build this whole city and this whole world full of emotion and really hard topics because we started with something that was light and silly and fun.
Mhm. And I think I think also what's happening is that they're processing whatever elements or emotions that are involved in that scene or are involved in that play scheme. And because there's so many things happening, it's not just language, but you're also providing language to whatever emotional event or whatever it is that their brain has not been able to let go of or has not been able to completely process
Mhm.
because they don't have the tools to be able to process that in their lives. So by allowing them to do that, they can, it's interesting because you call it meeting them in their metaphor, and for like therapists is meeting the client where they are.
Yeah.
So it's essentially the same thing. If you meet somebody where they are, then you're going to go to the next stage of the journey that will take them to the reaching of a goal or an objective. However, you can't go beyond the client and have the client be on like step one and you are already on step two,
Mhm.
because they're not going to be able to reach that until they have really planted their feet on that step one. And they will let you know, as you have seen, when they're ready for both of you to then go to that step two.
Yeah. And trying to do that too early, I think for kids who are not yet speaking or who don't have access to an AAC device, that them not being ready can look like push, it can look like scream, it can look like a lot of different things, which can be a sign that you're like 3 steps up trying to drag them up instead of getting on the step to walk up together. But it can also look like some of the things where this conversation started with bringing in things that sound violent, they sound like lies, they are using, those can also be signs of, wait a minute, I got to come back down to where you are, maybe give you an analogy, help you with analogical reasoning, so that then we can walk back up together.
Absolutely, 100%, because uh, it brings me to this misunderstanding that I was having with one of my clients.
Mm.
So, early on in our relationship, I was still trying to kind of like build that rapport, and there was a little bit of pushback, and now I understand why. They had had difficult relationships with other professionals, and so that trust had to be built. And so there were some physical moments where I was like, huh. And during those moments where there was some physicality, I also there was a lot of laughter from my client. And I'm like, this is kind of dissident. So one moment I was like, hey friend, I am feeling unsafe right now. How are you feeling? Do you feel safe or unsafe? And my client is laughing and they're like, unsafe, unsafe, but they're laughing. And I was like, okay, this is the way you are telling me that you're feeling unsafe, but you're laughing. So people are going to think that you are basically just making fun of the or light of the situation. And that wasn't it. Once we kind of continue to figure out where my client was, I was able to understand he is not having a safe moment because of historical context. So now I need to pivot. And that's when I began to really focus on special interests to help him see, oh, I can trust her. And I can then not use my body as my shield. So it's taken some time, but to really understand that typical affect isn't going to match our GLPs, to really kind of focus on that is going to help us bridge that gap towards progress.
Yeah, definitely the joining in the special interests. Like those interests are special for a reason. They do something very important for that child's body and brain. But I think you brought up laughter, and something interesting is that laughter can, like you mentioned, it can be a confusing cue for someone on the outside because we think laughter happy, but when there's an adrenaline rush in the body during a stressful situation, that can cause a laughter response. So it's that adrenaline rush. And um, it could be, it can also, laughter can be a distraction from anxiety, and it can also be a tension release. So when we think about the vocal cords, our vocal cords, um, their first job isn't actually talking. That's a secondary bonus that humans got. The real, like the primary job of the vocal cords is to close off and protect the lungs from danger, from inhaling dangerous things, and preventing food from getting in there. So it's a survival valve. Now, that means that it has a close relationship with the amygdala. Because if there's danger in the environment, I'm going to close off my vocal cords. Think about when you stub your toe, or when you're crying, you talk like this. And so laughter may also be a sign that their vocal cords are very tight, going like this, like boom, 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 to protect them, because our brains don't really know the difference between a tiger and a therapist sometimes.
Yeah.
And so anytime I'm noticing, because I think I just the vocal cords, I'm a singer as well. And so like I think there's such a fascinating mechanism, but I have to remind myself that this region of our body is very much in communication with the emotion and the fear center of the brain. And so I think you bring up such an interesting kind of like final thought about like it's not always what it seems. There's detective work also at a physiological level that behind that laughter could be fight or flight.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the times, because a lot of our kids are going to have a different way of communicating, this is where the misunderstandings can happen amongst, you know, school communities,
Yeah.
society. So really being able to hone in on what that physiological response means um, to that individual will help us build uh, progress towards what is going to be helpful to this individual for, safety, trust, boundaries, privacy, all these things that is important to them.
All right. Wow. We covered a lot tonight. We talked imagery, we talked safety, special interest, GLP, PDA. This has been one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. Thank you so much for I just talking to someone from a different but very related field, as well as someone who you live this. You live GLP every day, and I love the way that those experiences intersect. What I want to do is make sure that we leave a couple minutes for anyone who might have a question. So our Q&A is open, but while anyone is deciding if they'd like to ask a question to either myself or speaker Monica, I'm going to read off that this podcast recording was 1 hour and 30 minutes and is offered for 0.15 ASHA CEUs. And I'm seeing that we don't have any questions in the Q&A right now. And so I just want to say a big thank you. Monica, thank you so much for joining, for sharing your expertise and your passion.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here and sharing with all of you.
I know our listeners are really going to appreciate it as well. So as we're signing off, oh, I do see we have a question. Okay, great. So we have a couple minutes. Sarah asked, I work with people who are uncomfortable with swearing from students. Any thoughts on that, Monica?
So essentially, I feel like it's again another way of communicating, and I know that I'm personally not uncomfortable with it. So what I try to do is helping my client understand where it's safe to talk in a way that that language might be more accepted, and where it may not be a safe place. And it's I always do try with some of the skills building that I work with my clients is like, who are safe people and who are not safe people. And this is not just necessarily like, oh, like you were saying, the dangerous person in the corner. No, it's like, who can I connect with that I know that I can talk to this way, and who is someone that I don't necessarily feel that connection that I could talk to. And so when we build a list of trusted and not trusted people, then we have a better visual of where can I use this language and where can I not? Because again, language is language, and it's in a way of expressing. And lots of us will sometimes swear at whatever's happening in our lives or things that we're seeing. And I think personally that it would be hypocritical for me to expect anything less from the people that I work with.
All right. And then we had another question, was the software beyond animation and also Mineville High School or Minecraft? Okay, so Mineville High School is like kind of like a sub-location that's been created. The game is Minecraft. It's a very popular game. So many GLPs I know love it. And then the software is called Vyond, which is Vyond. So I definitely recommend checking that out. And Minecraft is a go-to for so many neurodivergent kids and teens and adults too, because you can really build the world that you want. All right, well, that now brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you so much to everyone for joining the Gestalt Get-Together, and I can't wait to see you at another recording.